Okay, so imagine you're a forest manager right now. You need to decide what trees to plant.
Mhm.
And that decision, it has to work for what, 60, maybe even 100 years? You're essentially placing a bet on the climate of the next century.
Yeah, it's a huge time scale
Yeah,
and a huge challenge.
that's exactly the core problem we're digging into today. It's the heart of this constraint facing European forestry.
And we're focusing on a really powerful new study that tries to quantify just how tough that bet has become. The paper is called A Climate-Induced Tree Species Bottleneck for Forest Management in Europe, led by Johannes Wessely.
And their main finding, it's immediately, well, compelling, isn't it? They're saying climate change is creating this tree species bottleneck.
Exactly. It means the pool of species that managers can safely plant today,
Okay.
it's shrinking dramatically,
Mm.
much smaller than we perhaps thought.
We're not talking about some slow, gradual thing down the line. It's an immediate reduction in safe choices right now.
Which is so critical because, European forests are already feeling the pressure. We're seeing these big die-offs, maybe worse than anything in the last 150 years.
Right.
So the industry needs to replant, needs to regenerate, but the climate is shifting under their feet, and these trees live for so long.
And that brings us to something really key in this paper's approach. They call it the continuous suitability constraint. Can you unpack that a bit? What does it mean practically?
Okay, so think about how studies used to look at this. Often it was like a snapshot approach.
Comparing now versus, say, 2090.
Exactly, a time slice.
Mm.
But the climate doesn't just jump from today's state to an end-of-century state. It changes continuously, sometimes unpredictably, along the way.
Uh-huh.
So this continuous suitability constraint says, for a species to be a safe bet today, its climate niche, its comfort zone, has to cover all the conditions it might face throughout its entire life.
So let me get this straight. If I plant a seedling now, and maybe in 30 years there's a really bad decade, too hot or too dry, even if things get better later.
Then that species is considered unsuitable for that whole 60 or 100-year plan under this constraint.
Wow, okay.
That investment, that tree, is potentially lost because it couldn't handle that intermittent period. The species needs to be robust enough for the entire journey through a changing climate.
That really highlights the risk, doesn't it? It's not just about the destination, but the whole path.
Precisely. And that's what makes this paper so insightful. It tries to map that whole century-long trajectory.
So how did they actually quantify this? I know they use a lot of data and these things called species distribution models, or SDMs. Maybe briefly explain what those are.
Sure. SDMs are basically statistical tools. They look at where a species currently lives, all the specific locations.
Like GPS points on a map.
Sorta, yeah. Plot locations.
Mm-hmm.
And they correlate those locations with the climate variables there, temperature, rainfall, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It essentially maps out the species' preferred climate conditions, its comfort zone.
Okay.
And they used a huge data set here, data from over 238,000 locations across Europe. Yeah, building these models for 69 key European tree species. That's apparently over 90% of the species listed in the European Atlas. So it's pretty comprehensive.
That sounds like a really solid foundation, and they projected this forward, not just for one future scenario.
That's right. They looked across the whole 21st century, decade by decade, at a 1-kilometer grid resolution. And crucially, they used 3 different potential climate futures, the IPCC scenarios, or RCPs.
Right, the representative concentration pathways.
Yeah. RCP 2.6, which is a future with strong climate action.
The optimistic one.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
Then RCP 4.5, more intermediate, sort of business as usual.
Yeah.
And RCP 8.5, the high emissions, severe warming scenario.
So they could see how this bottleneck changes depending on how much the climate actually warms.
Exactly. And using these models across time and scenarios, they could identify 3 different groups or pools of species.
And which pool is the really critical one for managers making decisions today?
Well, they defined 1, species suitable now, like in the 2020s. 2, species only suitable at the end of the century, the 2090s. And the third, crucial pool, the continuously suitable species.
Ah, the ones that meet that continuous suitability constraint.
Precisely. That pool represents the safe options, the species a manager could theoretically plant today with confidence they'll survive the entire rotation period's climate changes.
And they didn't just stop at survival, did they? They also looked at what these forests actually do for us.
Correct. They assessed all 69 species for their potential to deliver on 3 key functions.
Yeah.
Timber production, storing carbon, and biodiversity conservation.
How did they measure biodiversity?
They used the habitat value for Lepidoptera butterflies and moths as a kind of proxy. They're often good indicators for broader biodiversity.
Okay, interesting. So let's get to the results. What do they find? How big is this bottleneck, say, under that middle-of-the-road RCP 4.5 scenario?
Right. Under RCP 4.5, the average number of continuously suitable species, the safe bets per square kilometer across Europe,
Yeah.
it drops to just 9.4 species.
Only 9 or 10 species on average. Wow. How does that compare to what's suitable today?
It's a big drop. Compared to the pool suitable right now, the continuously suitable pool shrinks by 38.1% under that intermediate RCP 4.5. And under the severe RCP 8.5, it's almost half, a 49.2% reduction.
Nearly half the options gone just based on surviving the climate shifts over their lifetime. That's stark.
It really is.
And does this impact everywhere equally? Or are some areas hit harder?
No, there are definitely clear regional differences. The loss compared to current suitability seems strongest in Northern Europe.
Really? Up north?
Yeah, under RCP 4.5, their pool shrinks by about 52%. But interestingly, places like the big mountain ranges, the Alps, the Pyrenees, they seem relatively buffered.
Why would mountains fare better? That seems a bit counterintuitive.
Well, it seems to be about where species are relative to their climate limits now. In many high elevation areas, species are near their cold limits.
Okay.
So as things warm up, the conditions actually stay suitable or maybe even get slightly better for them throughout the century. They don't cross a critical heat or drought threshold as easily.
Whereas in hotter, drier regions like maybe southwestern Europe, the warming pushes them over the edge more quickly.
That seems to be the pattern, yes. Southwestern Europe and the sort of hemiboreal zone show some of the biggest challenges.
Now, you mentioned 3 pools of species. One finding that caught my eye was this idea of an illusion of gain. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this is really interesting. The study found that while the continuously suitable pool, the safe bet pool, is shrinking,
Right.
the pool of species that will be suitable only at the end of the century, in the 2090s, is actually projected to increase quite a bit, sometimes by over 85% compared to that safe bottleneck pool.
So more species might like the climate in 2090 than can survive the whole journey.
Exactly.
Good.
Especially in Northern Europe, where that future pool could be much larger.
So why can't managers just plant those future winners now, get ahead of the game?
Because of that continuous suitability constraint again. Those species might love the 2090s climate, but they're not suited to today's climate.
I see.
If you plant them now, they face a really high risk of failure in the short term. Maybe they can't handle current frost patterns, or they get stressed by conditions in the 2030s or 2040s.
So they're not safe now, even if they would be later.
Precisely. Managers today can't really utilize those potential future gains because the immediate planting risk is just too high. It's a timing problem.
The pace of climate change versus the long life of the tree creates this temporal mismatch.
You've got it. The longevity of the investment clashes with the speed of the environmental change.
Okay, so if the pool of safely plantable species is shrinking, what does that mean for what we actually want forests to do? Timber, carbon, biodiversity. How are those functions affected?
Yeah, this is where it gets quite concerning. Remember that average of 9.4 continuously suitable species? When you look at how many of those species have high potential for specific functions, the numbers drop even further. Under RCP 4.5, on average, only about 3.18 species per square kilometer have high potential for timber. For carbon storage, it's around 3.53. And for that biodiversity proxy, just 2.56 species.
So even within the small pool that can survive, only a fraction are really good at providing these key services.
That's the worrying part. Compared to the functional potential in today's suitable pool, these values are down by 33% to over 43%.
Wow.
And maybe even more alarmingly, they found that for 6.2% of the entire study area under RCP 4.5,
Yeah.
there wasn't a single species left with high timber production potential that was also continuously suitable through the century.
Not one. That's a huge implication for forestry in those areas.
It really is. It
Yeah.
signals a potential crisis for managing forests for multiple goals, what we call multifunctionality.
Right, getting timber and carbon storage and biodiversity from the same forest.
Exactly. The potential to do that, well defined in the study, as having at least 2 high potential species for all 3 functions. That potential is reduced by over 43% compared to now. It only remains high in about 56% of the area they studied.
That's a significant loss of functional capacity. Did any species stand out as, like, superstars, able to provide all 3 functions at a high level and survive the century?
Yeah, they looked for that. The elite species, you might say. High potential for timber, carbon, and biodiversity, and also continuously suitable.
And
Only 3 native species made that very exclusive list.
just 3. Which ones?
European beech, Fagus sylvatica, and 2 oaks, pedunculate oak, Quercus robur, and sessile oak, Quercus petrea.
Beech and oak. Wow. If only 3 native species really tick all those boxes for resilience and high function. What does that mean for managing forests that currently rely on other species, like maybe pines or spruces, which are very common?
Well, it means that a primary adaptation strategy, creating diverse, mixed forests to spread risk and increase resilience.
Yeah, mixing species is usually seen as a good thing.
It is. But this bottleneck severely restricts the ingredients you can safely use for that mix. If you only have 3 or 4 reliable options in a given area, it's much harder to build that robust mix stand. It limits the use of species mixing as an adaptation tool.
So the bottleneck limits the solution, in a way.
In a very real way, yes.
Okay, so if managers have fewer safe options, what's the proposed way forward? How can they adapt? The paper must suggest some strategies.
It does. The core idea is, if you can't fully rely on picking the right species for the next 100 years because the uncertainty is too high and the pool's too small, then you need to change the planning approach. They suggest systems with shorter planning horizons, essentially building in more flexibility to adapt the species mix more frequently.
Shorter planning periods? But trees grow for decades. How does that work practically?
It's about active, ongoing management. For example, you might plant those few safe bottleneck species today.
Okay, the beech and oak, maybe a couple of others depending on the location.
Right. But then you manage the forest canopy differently. You might plan to thin it out earlier than usual or create gaps.
Why?
To create opportunities to introduce those future winter species, the ones that aren't safe to plant now, but will be suitable later.
Ah, so you bring them in mid-rotation once the climate has shifted enough for them.
Exactly. You introduce them, say, 30 or 40 years down the line when the climate is more favorable for them, rather than taking the big risk of planting them today. It requires being much more adaptive and hands-on throughout the rotation.
That makes a lot of sense. It's moving from a plant and leave model to more continuous intervention. Now, let's put our critical thinking hats on. These models are powerful, but they have limits, right? What are some of the main caveats the researchers themselves point out?
Oh, absolutely. And they're upfront about it. A key one is that the models work with long-term climate averages, typically over decades.
Okay.
They don't explicitly simulate those sudden, sharp shocks, the extreme events, like a really severe drought year or an unexpected deep frost or massive heat wave.
And those extremes are often what actually cause the big die-offs we see, aren't they?
Very often, yes. So the model might say a species is suitable based on the average conditions over 10 years, but it doesn't capture the risk of being wiped out by a single extreme event within that decade.
Which means the results might even be a bit optimistic. The real-world bottleneck could be even tighter.
It certainly suggests that possibility, yeah. They also acknowledge other things aren't explicitly included, like how species might naturally adapt through genetic changes over time.
Or how fast they can migrate to newly suitable areas.
Right, or complex interactions between species like competition or pests and diseases, which are also changing with the climate. These factors could either help buffer the changes or potentially make things worse.
And one more thing, the study focused on native European species. What about bringing in species from elsewhere, non-natives?
That's a really important point. The authors do mention that non-native species might offer some options to fill the gaps left by declining natives. But they rightly stress the need for extreme caution. Introducing non-natives comes with significant risks. They could become invasive, outcompete native species, disrupt local ecosystems, bring new diseases.
Yeah, it's a complex trade-off, not a simple solution.
Definitely not. It requires very careful assessment of the potential benefits versus those ecological risks.
This has been a really fascinating, if somewhat sobering, deep dive. The big takeaway for you, our listener, seems to be that climate change is hitting the potential of Europe's forests harder than maybe we realize.
Yeah, specifically by shrinking this pool of safe long-term planting options, which in turn limits our ability to create those resilient mixed forests we need.
It really constrains that key adaptation strategy.
It does, and the authors hypothesize this isn't just a European issue. This bottleneck effect, this clash between long lifespans and rapid environmental change, it's likely happening in other forests, maybe other long-lived ecosystems around the world too.
Which leads to a pretty stark final thought, doesn't it? If the severity of this bottleneck depends directly on the rate and amount of climate change.
Doesn't this research powerfully underline just how critical, effective climate change mitigation is right now for preserving the health and the services we get from forests, not just in Europe, but globally?
It certainly Feels that way. It really brings home the connection between today's emissions policies and the long-term future of these vital ecosystems.